The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, let's get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this WOMA Wednesday webinar, Accelerating Results with Integrated Marketing. And I hope everyone's doing great today. I'm Lauren, a Member Relations Manager for the Word of Mouth Marketing Association. And I'm really excited to co-host with our presenter, Bonnie Harris. Hi, Bonnie, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. So before we start, I'm just going to do a short recap about WOMA. As many of you probably know, we were founded in 2004, and WOMA is the leader in ethical word-of-mouth marketing practices. And we're committed to building an industry based on a strong ethical foundation. So through education, such as WOMA Summit, which is coming up in November in Miami Beach, and professional development opportunities, knowledge sharing with top industry marketers, our organization is really committed to progressing the word of mouth marketing industry through three things: advocacy, education, and ethics. But we're really excited to learn more about the topic of integrated marketing communications, aside from that word of mouth aspect. So, WOMA is the official trade association and premier nonprofit organization dedicated to word of mouth and social media marketing, focusing on advancing the discipline of credible word of mouth marketing, both online and offline. And as I mentioned, joining me today is Bonnie Harris, founder of Wax Marketing and adjunct professor at West Virginia University's Reed College of Media, which is where she received her master's degree. And I think that's pretty awesome. So I know Bonnie has some really interesting info to share about IMC, and she has some fantastic examples that we're excited for you to see. So please enjoy. And lastly, I am recording this session, so you can access that later on when we send that out. And if you have a question, feel free to just go ahead and type that in the questions tab or the chat function, and we'll get to those at the end. But feel free to type those throughout Bonnie's presentation. So without further ado, here's Bonnie.
Oh, well, thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm really excited to be talking to all of you, and we will probably take about 45 minutes for the presentation and then have plenty of time for questions afterward. Before we get started, here's a little bit about me. I founded Wax Marketing in 2002. We're an IMC agency that's based in St. Paul, Minnesota. And we work nationally with a pretty wide variety of clients. You may have heard of some of them, including Yale University and National Geographic. And as Lauren mentioned, I'm also an adjunct professor at WVU's Reed College of Media. If you need to reach me after the presentation, my website is waxmarketing.com. You can always email me with questions at waxmarketing@gmail.com. And I'm on Twitter at waxgirl333. I'm also on LinkedIn at Wax Marketing. Although they always say it's good for mid-level communications people, we have people who are entry-level, people who have pretty senior experience in the work world, and you can find out more at imc.wvu.edu. Okay, done with the little commercial here. So during this webinar, we're going to be talking about the pieces of IMC that really make it tick. And to begin with, it's really important to understand what the definition of IMC is, because I found when I go out and I teach or I'm working with clients, there's a lot of misconceptions out there, even in the marketing world. So knowing what the purpose of IMC is really helps create stronger campaigns. And that means focusing on behavior, strategies, and link tactics. We really want to learn not only how to work across multiple channels, but how those channels can be utilized so they can boost the performance of each other. And I've got 3 case studies we're going to be going through in the course of this presentation to really help tell the story of IMC and why we're finding that it's so effective. We focus on behavior because we need to understand a lot more about our audience and our customers than just who they are. And in fact, in some cases, we don't really care who they are. We just care what they do. And we'll talk about that a little bit, as well as the fact that strategies are key to IMC successes. And many people forget about strategy. We'll learn the different types of strategies, how they fit into the overall campaign, and which strategies you want to choose depending on your goals. Linked tactics are the heart of IMC. So we'll talk about good combinations of linked tactics, how to measure them, and how to create your own toolkit of linked tactics so that you can be more effective as you're working out there every day. As you know, social media can not only boost other more traditional channels, within social media you can do a few things to boost the results of each network also. And although I'm assuming as word-of-mouth marketers you're probably an expert at that, hopefully I can give you a couple of new ideas where that's concerned. And finally, I want to make the point that you don't have to be on an integrated marketing project per se to use IMC methods. And we'll talk about how to incorporate IMC into what you're doing today. I'm hoping you'll have the chance after this presentation to take some things back with you and begin to use them right away for immediate results. And that's when I've spoken about IMC, a lot of people find that they really can do that. And of course, lastly, we'll have time for Q&A. So write down your questions, as Lauren said, as we go through, and I'll answer them at the end as best I can. Before we go into the definition of IMC, I want to talk about what the definition of integrated is, because really, when we talk about integrated, we're talking about combining or coordinating separate elements so that we have a much stronger whole. And we're organizing those different units so that they function cooperatively. But this is the real definition, according to the AMA, of integrated marketing communications. And this is also the one that is embraced by West Virginia University. And there are three key words that I think need to be emphasized in this definition, which is kind of long and lengthy, I know. But first is planning. IMC has to be planned carefully because we're trying to achieve synergy, which is really the secret sauce in any integrated marketing project. The next word that you need to remember is relevance. The messages have to resonate with your audience, and that's the same in word-of-mouth marketing as well. So we'll be spending some time on how you define those audiences today. And lastly, messages have to be consistent. They've got to be translatable and repeatable. So those three words, planning, relevance, and consistency, are really the cornerstones of IMC. Many people are confused about this definition today, including a lot of those that work within marketing, as I've said before. And what this really means, just boiled down, is that instead of planning, marketing, advertising, PR, all those different things as a silo or separate endeavor, IMC really tries to bring them all together so that we're working in a planned, synchronized fashion. And the idea is that we're communicating with one voice across multiple messaging channels. Some people call them platforms. I like to call them channels. But the overall idea, again, is that if we combine our efforts, the results will be much stronger due to the synergy and crossover that exists between these channels. So let's start by, the proof is really in the pudding, as I say. So let's go right into our first case study to show you the kinds of results that we're getting with IMC. One of the first big hits for IMC, and one of the campaigns that really made people stand up and take notice, was the Old Spice Smell Like a Man campaign. And this was in 2010, so IMC was still, you know, a lot of people hadn't really thought about it much, but this campaign was a genius mixture of social media engagement, viral video, traditional advertising, and public relations. Now, what this agency did before the ads ran, and I believe the first one ran on the Super Bowl of that year, was they engaged influencers on Twitter. So this was also a really good example of one of the first big influencer marketing campaigns that we had. They sought out people and they encouraged them to ask a question of Isaiah Mustafa, who is the actor in the series. And then literally within less than a 24-hour turnaround, they created a funny video in response, and some of them were hilarious. If you do a YouTube search for Smell Like a Man Twitter, you'll turn up some of these gems. And Lauren just posted a one of the YouTube responses, so you can watch that at any time. But I can tell you that those of us who were on Twitter at the time were going nuts trying to get our questions answered, and it created a virtual stampede of influencers trying to get this guy's attention. More importantly, this campaign had some tremendous results. There were over 100 million YouTube views, and if you think about it, this is 2010, so YouTube was not the juggernaut that it is right now. So that was huge. There are over 1.2 billion media impressions right now, and I can guarantee you that most of them are positive. And it really did revive the old brand, but more importantly, in the first 3 months of this campaign, sales jumped 55%. But in the 4th month of the campaign, and that's after the ad started, sales jumped another 107%. So this was really remarkable proof for integrated marketing at the time. When we talk about IMC, we really talk about alignment first, and these are some of the key components that you need to understand about IMC when you're going to try to start to use it. Each part of IMC needs to be aligned in terms of the message and the creative structure. In IMC, tactics are synchronized, so again, you increase the synergy between them, and that's the real power behind the methodology and why it's so effective. We just saw that from the Old Spice example. And at Wax, we often see results from IMC projects that are 2, 3, or sometimes even 10 times better than from traditional campaigns. So much so that occasionally when I present at a conference, people don't believe me when I tell them the results that we get. We have to understand buyer behavior, and it's more important than demographics or even psychographics, because we want to understand how customers are moving through the buying cycle in order to influence and accelerate that movement. If you think about understanding behavior, it's why someone like me, a 53-year-old marketer, and a 17-year-old high school student like my friend Abby are both really huge fans of Warby Parker. If you really dissect how that brand was launched, you'll see that they paid little attention to the demographics of the glasses wearers. In fact, what they did was they paid attention to the problems of the glasses wearers, and they tried to find out how we behaved when we were buying them. And so for that reason, they were really able to launch that brand across a wide variety of demographics and really didn't try to focus on that one specific persona, and it's worked for them. In IMC, we also have a consistency of creative that in turn creates familiarity. And I always like to say that familiarity breeds synergy, and that's also how results are accelerated. In IMC, we deploy common strategies across channels, and we also try to identify the sets of link tactics that will work time after time for that brand. This becomes our toolkit as we learn the right sequences, the right mix of channels, and the responses of our customers to those techniques. And finally, just like traditional marketing, we always measure at the end of a project. But what's different about IMC is that we measure iteratively as we go. That way, we kind of, for lack of a better term, we fail forward during the course of the project as we find the combinations and the timing that really work. And as we become better at working with a brand or an organization or a person, whatever we're trying to promote, that measurement becomes much more refined, and we become much more powerful as we go. All right, so let's talk about learning behavior. Learning about demographics and psychographics, when we were doing that, we were really just trying to help understand the customer and what they do. When we learn about who they are, we can better predict what they might do or how they might respond to certain stimulus. And it's the same in influencer marketing. I mean, you know how those influencers that you work so hard to build relationships with respond to certain stimulus. You know how long it takes to create a relationship before you can really go for the ask. And this is basically the same type of information we're after with customers. For that reason, we often work with personas. And if you've been in the food industry or some other industries, you're familiar with personas. Basically, they're fictional representations of your ideal customers. They're based on real data about those demographics and about their online behavior, along with some speculation about their values and their histories and motivations, things like that. And personas can be really helpful when you're still learning about behavior because you're really kind of getting into the head of your audience. Maybe the best persona, if you're not familiar with these, that you can think of is Betty Crocker, and that's a picture of her down in the right hand. She is such a great persona that in 2013 they did a study at General Mills that showed that almost 40% of the US population thought she was a real person. And basically, she's a persona that General Mills has used for years and updated and used in their advertising, as you know. In IMC, we're focused a lot on inbound marketing. And for that reason, we need to understand how the customer, the audience, acquires content. How do they like to read the news? Where do they like to get their product information? How much are they influenced by their peers? We know that moms, for example, I'm sure that as you do, typically buy off the recommendations of other moms. Does it really matter as much how old they are or who they are? Not unless it affects their behavior. So we really look at where they like to get their content first. And we also look at buying behavior, because business to consumer buying behavior is a lot different than business to business buying behavior. Most buying behavior, though, does go through 5 steps, and we can map those transitions. I mean, Google Analytics and a lot of other tools like that, as you know, help us do that. But we can map those transitions from education to coming up with alternatives to the actual buying, for example, as we see customers doing just those things in response to our messages. And as we map those, we start to learn how to accelerate that. The other segmentation, some segmentation strategies that people use include geodemographics. When you talk about hyperlocal marketing, that's really neighborhood personas, because collectively we found in very small neighborhoods you have a lot of the same behavior. You might have ethnic segmentation strategies that can help you understand behavior a little bit more, particularly in some urban neighborhoods. The relationship with the brand, whether it's new, whether it's existing, can help you understand about behavior. And the other piece too is understanding among your customers who the early adopters are. You know, if you're familiar with the bell curve of adoption, where people fall on that can really help you start to predict behavior. But let's get to our second case study, because this is kind of a fun one, and it's one that I found on SlideShare, by the way. This is an interesting case study because it combined tactics at both ends of the spectrum. In other words, they used the most traditional tactics, events, billboards, advertising, etc., with what I like to call bleeding edge technology, including even holograms. And that's a hologram of Modi down there on the left-hand side. So the BJP Party of India was the #2 political party when the last big elections came, and they knew that in order to win power, they had to capture a significant youth presence. And so the party decided to focus its message on change. And they wanted to attract these young voters by really talking about change. First, they developed pretty specific personas within that category of young voters, and I believe on this one they had 11 or 12 that they would track behavior on. Then they carefully chose some new media strategies and traditional strategies and tactics to deliver that goal. And one of the things, and there's actually, I found this again on SlideShare, and there's actually a slide that I can send you that link after the presentation that talks about the timing of these things, because what they tried to do was they tried to introduce the new technology first. And within IMC, particularly with an audience that tends to engage. Again, we talk about content acquisition behavior, but tends to engage with newer media first. You always want to lead with the newest stuff, if you will. Knowing what kind of adopters you have can help with that as well. But what happened with this is they advertised events, and because India is such a huge country, obviously, Modi, the leader of this party, could not get to all these events, so they created a hologram, and they had him delivering his message via hologram at these events. Again, a great blend of traditional and new media. A lot of the younger voters went out to the events just to see this hologram. I know, frankly, I would have done the same thing. The results were that they had a landslide victory for this guy. It was the highest voting rate in the history of Indian elections. There were 2 billion impressions and counting. And again, they delivered the youth vote. They had more youth voters than in any other election in the history of India. I also want to say that the little circle in the middle is actually a mobile app that they created called the Run Modi game, and I think you can still download it. I'm not 100% sure, but again, that was a really creative way to get people to have him be top of mind, even on their phones. The 3D holograms were amazing. They also did Google Hangouts, and this is 2012, so those were pretty new. And then once they had introduced all the new stuff, they supported that with traditional TV ads and print ads that drove attention, again, even more attention to some of these newer tactics. So again, this is a great example of an IMC project where the party literally gave IMC the credit for winning. And so one of the things that I always tell people to do is, if you see examples like this, it's really fun to kind of dissect them and go through and see if you can figure out which components came first, how they timed it, and that sort of thing. As a side note, I also noticed when I was doing this that India loves SlideShare. So if you're working on any projects that have any kind of component that has an Indian component, I definitely would include SlideShare in the mix. All right, so let's get on to strategies, because this is really one of the most important pieces within IMC. For most types of goals, you're going to have a different set of strategies, but there are some characteristics of strong strategies that you really want to pay attention to. First of all, they're consistent. It's one of the pieces that people forget about, but really trying to stay consistent with strategies is very important. They're the highway, if you will, and your tactics are more or less the cars. Although in some weather you need to drive an SUV, which is almost all the time here in Minnesota. In others you need a Prius. But really the main point about this is that a strategy keeps you headed in the same direction. And again, a lot of people jump from objectives to tactics. That's really a bad idea, because strategies help you stay consistent. And if you recall, the definition of IMC, consistency is a big part of that. They help you also increase the synergy between channels. If you remember that we talked about familiarity, a common strategy can really help you with that as well. You need to deploy them across channels or within different parts of a channel. So a good example of that might be within social media. If you have a strategy going for Twitter, you need to translate and reuse that strategy across all of the networks that you're using for that particular project. Strategies are very, very targeted toward influencing behavior, particularly buyer behavior, and they're often specific to personas. To use the example of content acquisition behavior again, if you think about a persona who is in the youth voter who, you know, for the BJP party, they probably had specific strategies and messaging strategies that talk to that particular youth voter. The best strategies combine traditional and online media and or social media. I found that what often happens is people are very loyal and almost stuck to the channels that they work with. If you're a more traditional marketer, you really like print. Sometimes newer media marketers love social media and don't, are hesitant to jump back into something like direct mail. But what I can tell you from the work that we've done is that the very most powerful strategies are the ones that utilize both sides of that coin and really synergize between the two of them and synchronize between the two of them. Strategies have to be deployed across channels and have a specific focus. And a lot of it has to do with what type of timing you're doing. You can have a seasonal strategy. This is likely for retail or even some nonprofits that might do, I had a nonprofit that did disaster relief. So during the hurricane season, for example, they did quite a bit of fundraising at that time. As I mentioned before, messaging strategies can help you change the perception of your brand or your organization. You've probably already got some of these strategies that you're using. I want to make a point that it's important that this isn't an unconscious pursuit. And what I mean by that is I find a lot of marketers who are so competent at what they do that they're really not thinking about what they're doing when they're doing it. They know what works. They kind of go on autopilot when they set up their content frequency channels and charts, and they really don't think about why it's working. If you're conscious of the strategies that work for you, you can really fine-tune them. So that's a point I just wanted to make, that being conscious of what you're doing can help you own it as well as improve it. I talked about hyper-local strategies before, and those often involve a small set of zip codes. And it's probably one you might use for a small retail shop, or I use them for the offices of the physicians' practices that I work with. It can also help if you don't know your audience that well. Neighborhoods typically behave in similar ways. And so really focusing on a small area or a small neighborhood can help you learn about the behavior of your customer, and you can then, expand it from there. You guys know all about word of mouth, and it's often a way to design a strategy when the budget is small or your client wants a message to go viral. I will make the point here, though, that most viral campaigns that you see are really carefully planned IMC projects. That's what I've seen when I see something go viral. If you break it down and you dissect what that agency or what that marketer has done, you'll see typically some very strong synchronization between the channels, and the timing is very carefully thought out. If you've got a product or service offering that you're introducing, you often have a very strong call to action. Obviously, when you're changing perception, you don't want to try to get them to do too much until you have them convinced about that new perception. But when it's really a launch or something's coming out that's brand new, that's when a call to action is important. This also dictates which channels are being used. Strategies to increase traffic to reach a message on a certain landing page, or to initiate certain types of conversions, or even a particular promotion or something that I'm sure is very familiar to you. But basically, if you get nothing off this slide, just get this, that each strategy should focus on a particular stage of the buying cycle, or in other words, moving a customer from one stage of the buying cycle to the next stage. I had a question last time about the actual buying cycle. Even though this is taught in very traditional marketing classes and it's kind of old school, I found that primarily these 5 steps still hold true no matter what you're doing, no matter what type of product you're selling, even if it's a personal brand, and we do a lot of work with that too. So to go over that in review, the first one is problem recognition. They've identified that there's a problem and that they need to find a solution. The next one is information search, where they're kind of gathering and educating themselves about what the alternatives are in the market. The third is when you're evaluating solutions and people are getting pretty serious about doing something, but they still need more education. Of course, there's purchase, and then post-purchase behavior, which is a huge piece of why word of mouth marketing has gotten so popular, because we're really understanding, particularly as it becomes so easy and so inexpensive to launch brands, that reinforcing that purchase and reinforcing that loyalty of an existing customer is very, very important, and word of mouth marketing is one of the best strategies to do that. Now, I think it would be kind of tedious to take you through every different type of strategy we use at WAX, but I also know that there aren't too many comprehensive lists of possible strategies out there. So I thought I would kind of compromise and provide the types of strategies we choose based on the kind of goals for your campaign. I'm going to put this presentation on SlideShare, and there's going to be a recording of it for you as well, but I do have a list of strategies in a simple Word doc. If you need it, just email me and I'll send it out, or Lauren can do that.
Yep.
So the first type of brand strategies are, they typically create awareness. So you're trying to either introduce something new, change the perception of an existing brand, or create a brand extension, meaning you have an existing brand and perhaps they're going to introduce a new product out of that. So they're typically used earlier in the purchasing cycle to help identify and inform, and they also provide your brand or introduce your brand as a possible solution. They often involve attempting to gain earned media, and by earned media, I mean public relations or editorial placements. Word of mouth is great post-purchase, but it's really great here as well, particularly if you have a lot of peer-influenced behavior going on. Cause marketing, the partnering with nonprofits toward a common goal, is something that's used very often in this situation. Brand awareness can also be reinforced through sponsorships, celebrity endorsements, brand journalism, and content marketing and online marketing as well. So these are all kind of the things to consider if you're thinking about a strategy that involves brand awareness. Content strategies are used when there's a longer sales cycle, or when the customer is really sophisticated or the brand needs credibility, but really when there's a lot of education to be done and you have a kind of educated customer that likes to do their own research. You'll also see, just as a side note, that a lot of these strategies are not exclusive to one category or another. These are just the ones that have been more effective for these particular categories. Content strategies, going back to that, also begin to engage the audience rather than provide just passive education. Often a content strategy involves a business-to-business product or service, but these are also the kinds of strategies that can be deployed across the most channels. So if you've really got a robust marketing engine with a broad spectrum of channels, from traditional, say you're doing direct mail and a lot of print ads, all the way to, have a lot of Reddit influencers, for example, content strategies are the way to go. They're also often used when there's a large number of competitors and you've got to cut through the clutter, and you need to use content strategies, lastly, when you need to move your customer closer to purchase from solution evaluation. So right there, when you're trying to sell them and win them over, that's a great time for content as well. Promotional strategies, and we've got promotional and then geographic strategies. Promotional strategies are often used when you want your customer to buy. So this is when you really want to push them over the edge. You've educated them, perhaps there's a lot of competition with another product or brand, but when you really need to take them into the active buying process, you would use a promotional strategy. And that can often be done through events and sponsorships, but is more often done with contests, rewards programs that offer an incentive, digital promotions, sales, and things like that. I would also like to point out that seasonal strategies work in this instance as well, but they're most often connected to sales for holidays, for example. Cause marketing, if it's used in this to really get people to buy has to be much more action oriented than just education. So for example, Yoplait and the Susan G. Komen Foundation had a strategy a few years ago that was based on the purchase of yogurt. You would just whip the top of a yogurt container off, collect a whole bunch, and the more that were collected, the more they would donate to the Susan G. Komen Foundation for breast cancer. The Melanoma Research Foundation has an event strategy, so they have 5Ks that help drive awareness and education about melanoma in different communities. There are a lot of layers within cause marketing, and there's not enough time to go into those right now, but if you have questions about cause marketing strategy and how it applies to IMC, please don't hesitate to ask, because it's a big part of some of the projects that we do. Lastly, geographical strategies are often used when a customer is not well known, and we've talked about hyperlocal in the past and a neighborhood persona, but with a geographic strategy, typically your customer moves through the buying cycle pretty quickly. Think of your local dry cleaner or the nearest grocery store. If you've got urgency rooms in your neighborhood, then that's a new kind of GP, ER specialty healthcare clinic. That's a great example. They're using geographical strategies to open up hundreds of clinics across the country and refining their tactics as they learn more about those particular neighborhoods. These strategies typically drive brand awareness and sales at the same time. So hyperlocal marketing is typically done digitally, but it can also include micro events. And you'll also see partnerships between retail locations. Medical practice buildings are a great example of this kind of strategy. When you're choosing channels, carefully study audience behavior. The real key to determining the correct mix is that where you're meeting your audience needs to be where they most like to receive their information. So the tactics that you choose will help you develop the best timing for delivering that information. And keep in mind, you don't have to use every channel you have. For Apple, for example, the costs of maintaining social media channels are just too high. Their marketing is so sophisticated that they don't need to include a lot of social media on their own, although they, as you know, they work with a lot of influencers who spread the message for them. In IMC, we test constantly to determine the effectiveness of the channels we're using, and it's not dissimilar to cooking. I mean, this is my favorite carrot cake recipe here. I'm always kind of adding a little bit here, taking some out, doing different things to make it better, and IMC is just like that. You have to add new channels, try strategies across different channels, and test the timing as you go. This makes IMC fun for a lot of people, especially me, because I am always getting bored with what I'm doing, unfortunately, and I like to innovate new approaches. And we'll talk about that when we talk about tactics next. But keep in mind, once again, that we're looking for synergy between the channels. That's really where you get the strongest result. It is not doing channels at the same time. It's timing them so that you can get stronger results than your competition. If you're just executing your strategy simultaneously without any interaction between them, you're not going to get the same results. The last thing is that you're constantly updating your mix. And a lot of projects fail because they're not refining and updating as they go. And I have an example of that in a little bit. But before that, let's get to our last case study, which may surprise you, but this is a huge success for IMC, and that's Amazon's Prime Day, which I'm sure all of you in word of mouth heard about last month. And you know, the greatest thing about Prime Day, as Monica says, is reading the tweets on how bad Prime Day was. So if you looked at word of mouth and the Twitterverse or social media, it suggested that it was a dismal failure. And if for some reason you were in a hole and you didn't hear about it, Prime Day was a one-day shopping event on July 15th with Amazon promising more deals than Black Friday. And the goal of Prime Day was to get new Prime customers, increase engagement with existing Prime accounts, which was their primary goal, and get more people using the music services. Amazon is a huge mailer, I'm sure you know that, but what you may not know is they sent out 1 billion emails in the 9 days following the announcement of the sale. with an average read rate of 23%. So that's huge. And of those emails, 78 million promoted the Prime Day sale by using subject lines that reference the sale. So the integration coming up to the sale consisted mainly of emails that went out first, then social media, and of course public relations that were much closer to the actual sale. According to the media, it was panned in social media, and a lot of shoppers were frustrated. I mean, they covered that the coveted items weren't on sale or they sold out too quickly, but the numbers tell a different story. On July 15th, there were over 500,000 mentions of Amazon, which was a 78% increase from the day before. And of those mentions, over 60% were positive. Same-day sales were up 80%, which is huge. Remember, this is Amazon. They do a lot. And by 1 p.m., the speed with which the customers were ordering had surpassed 2014 Black Friday. They sold 39 million items. And they added more new customers for Prime than any other day that year. So if the goal was to engage and win business, Amazon should be satisfied. Again, it sold 39 million items, and they also had more new members than any other day. To me, that's a success, and it's directly attributable to integrated marketing. All right. The last piece of our presentation here is about link tactics. And as usual, I'll start with what powerful link tactics are, kind of what the components are, and give you some descriptions or some examples of the link tactics that we use. But the most disappointing part of the message here today is probably that there isn't a set of common link tactics that work for everyone. In dealing with tactics, just like in advertising or public relations or anything else, we're failing forward. In other words, we're seeing what works for the brand and what doesn't. And there are often tactics that work in a specific situation that won't work with a different brand or in a different stage of the buying cycle when they're linked together. And I'm sure you've all experienced this in the past. Again, as I said, strong link tactics are often a combination of traditional and newer media. They can link 2, 3, or even 4 or 5 tactics. I've got some that we have checklists with the timing on there of when we're going to do them, and they're literally, with some of the companies we've been working with for 2 or 3 years, can have 9 or 10, but that's pretty uncommon. Usually when you're thinking of your link tactic toolkit, you're thinking of 2, 3, or maybe 4. They're synchronized for the best effect. And go back to work today and look at some of your tactics and think about which ones you can link and when you might link them. You can begin to collect your set of link tactics that work for your brand pretty much at any time. You just have to identify the timing and continue to test that timing. But this is really how you start to build your toolkit. Good link tactics have a common message or tone. So make sure you're keeping your underlying strategy statement top of mind at all times and that there is some familiarity about your message. Just like strategies, you're probably familiar with the tactics that are available to you in marketing. So rather than a laundry list, the next 2 slides will reveal or review some simple link tactics and then some industry examples where brands have become really good at complex link tactics. Hopefully this will spark some ideas for you. In simple link tactics, everybody does posting their earned media on social media. That's kind of a no-brainer. Direct marketing and landing pages have been around for a really long time. Again, with some of these that are simple, you may be wanting to look at timing rather than just what you're doing and when you're doing it to see if you can make it a little bit better. Email and signage works really, really well. Don't ever, again, I've said it before, but don't ever underestimate the power of traditional and online tactics because there's some of the best results I've ever gotten. Print and mobile, I really like that. Radio and online is another good one. If you have a consumer-based product, traditional radio is a great way to do it. One thing I'll say, however, about print though is that it's become more of a boost mechanism for me and less of a direct draw. In other words, I use print to really boost the rest of my campaign results rather than making it the mainstay of an advertising campaign. This can be a really hard transition if you have a traditional client, but I would tell you that I've got some clients where we've reduced the cost of print ads in half and still significantly increased our results. And that's the flip that is going on with a lot of word of mouth too, is that the traditional is now boosting some of the newer things. Some brands have become masters at IMC, and integrated product placement is a great way to showcase that. I know that American Idol is ending, but when you see the glasses branded Coke on the judges table, the ads that run during the show, the sponsorship of concerts, and even the videos and the tweets and such, you're seeing a carefully synchronized IMC campaign, and one of the first ones for a TV show. Where American Idol is failing, though, is they haven't updated their tactics. They've updated their show, but you'll notice over the years they never updated their mix. And this is a great example when you light upon a recipe that works, but forget that you have to constantly tweak it to keep it working. That's why the shows like The Voice quickly upstaged them. They didn't reach new audiences because they didn't adopt new strategies and tactics. They weren't always testing to see that something, to make something better. Music promotion is one of the best examples of IMC, mainly because musicians are starving and they have no choice but to try some of this. And IMC can be really cost effective, but those that can afford it, some of the best marketers have led like this. I mean, it started with Sting's song Desert Rose, which was one of the first ones to be introduced in a commercial first versus being dropped. Music is where you notice timing and synchronization. You might argue that Beyonce just dropped her album by surprise, but I would argue back that the stealth of that launch was one of the strategies, and that the ensuing success really was due to the timing of the tactics that followed, including all the editorial. She switched it up and it was huge, and now you're seeing surprise drops all over the place, and they're not working as well. Again, you have to constantly tweak. Product launches, the Apple Watch is a great example. I will never forget, I was looking at Vogue magazine, and I was literally looking at the ad in the newest Vogue that had just come out for the Apple Watch, and I was updating my phone, and the update for the Apple Watch appeared on my phone almost at the same time. Apple is genius at IMC, so always watch what they're doing. And they get us to do a lot of things. Public service announcements and nonprofits, those are great examples where there's some really complex integration. Michelle Obama's Let's Move campaign was very in great detail integrated with So You Think You Can Dance, the TV show. And you'll see that there was a lot of great editorial and social media around that integration. And I think it's done really, really well because of it. Lastly, we want to talk about measuring. And again, measurement in IMC is iterative and it's ongoing. You've got to measure how your tactics are responding. I measure some things monthly, some things weekly, and sometimes even daily. If we're into something that's very heavy on digital, I'll be looking at it sometimes in the morning and again at the end of the day. It really depends on the scope of the project and the channels you're working on. But the idea is that the shorter the project, the more frequently you need to measure your tactics. You also should measure more frequently if you're newer to IMC and you're still building your toolkit. Social media engagement is a great way to practice measurement. Remember, we're always measuring link tactics, so you could take some time this week to look at 2 or 3 of your accounts, change up the times you post, or add a third account to your normal routing, and then measure the engagement by the number of comments or however you do that, and see if you can kind of tweak it. It's a really fun sort of lab experiment, and try to have a goal of maybe doing this kind of review once a week or so, and you'll find that you can really improve those quickly. Online clicks is another, of course, measurement, as is website behavior. You guys all know that. But the last thing I'll leave you with in testing is looking for unplanned messages. This is my biggest measurement for IMC. These are the messages, your messages, that are echoed and translated by your audience without prodding. You begin to see unplanned messages in earned media. Maybe an influencer is acting as an expert and he echoes a talking point, for example. That's when IMC is really, really working well. You can see it in spades in social media. I mean, remember Gary Gary Vee and his crush it term. I mean, that's all over the place now, and that's a really good example of a test of how something really worked, is to see those messages showing up. Another example of that is everything in moderation. Most people think that that phrase came from doctors, but in fact, it's part of a marketing message that was created after a nutrition study that was funded by the food companies. And now everything in moderation is used to justify everything in moderation, from drinking Coke to eating sugary cereal. It's a great example of how the food companies are getting unplanned messages out there among us. And the very last, we've covered most of these, but I do want to review one last time. These are a lot of ways to implement IMC, and to implement them either from the ground up or kind of inserting them into an existing project. Create a core strategy statement from your current set of messages. This isn't one that you would communicate, but one that you can kind of stick somewhere, and make sure that you're keeping an eye on it so that you know you have alignment in every message that you send. It doesn't have to be the exact same message, but you should really try to make sure that your messages are aligned so that you're creating familiarity again. Be conscious of your link tactics and measure their results. Build sets of 2, 3, or even 4 tactics, and tweak the timing continuously to see if you can improve the results. This helps you build your link tactic toolkit. If you're not good at strategies, I'm much more of a hands-on person, and thinking about strategy kind of makes my brain explode at times. So a lot of times, if you've got great tactics that are working, see if you can roll them into strategies and deploy those strategies across channels if you haven't already done that. Remember, your strategies need to stay consistent, but your tactics can be really fluid, and you need to change those up a lot. And finally, learn the flow of your target audience's buying behavior and try to influence it at every stage. See if you can accelerate the movement between those stages to improve your results as you get someone closer and closer to the buy, or in word of mouth marketing, you're often influencing people after the buy. But see if you can accelerate that sequence and how they move between those buying cycles, or those stages of the buying cycle. And that is pretty much my presentation for the day. I think we've got 8 or 9 minutes here to open it up to questions.
Thank you so much, Bonnie, for all your hard work with this presentation. I was even taking notes during the presentation, and it was a wonderful overview. So we do have a couple of questions, and the first one actually goes back to Old Spice. Catherine, one of our attendees, wanted to know, and I don't know if you know this, but did Old Spice pay the influencers on Twitter to ask questions?
No, they did not.
Interesting.
And they had influencers like Ashton Kutcher, Ellen DeGeneres, Demi Moore. I mean, people. There was an example on YouTube of this guy's response to Ashton Kutcher, and he talks about his kabillion followers on Twitter. Yeah. No, it was insane. We were all just going crazy because it was sort of like the cool kids thing to do.
Yeah. That goes back to your point on unplanned messages, and
right.
That really reminded me of word of mouth marketing. So that was a great example, and thank you for that. That was one of our only questions, but someone else wanted to know if we know how many items Amazon sells daily on average. They must have really enjoyed your example about Amazon Prime Day. So I don't know if you know that answer.
I don't know if I know that answer. You know, there's a very, very detailed write-up of this that one of the folks who works for me did on the Wax blog, which is waxmarketing.com/blog. And I've got it right here, and I'll see if it says there really quickly. But when they did on Prime Day, they sold 398 items were ordered per second.
Oh wow!
But I don't know what that stat is normally, and I would imagine there's also some press releases from Amazon that kind of touting their results. But I'm sure we could figure it out if we needed to. Mm-hmm. If things were up about 78%, you could probably do the math and get pretty close to the number that they normally sell.
Yeah, and I did look up some of that. This isn't a direct answer to that question, but in 2014, more than 5 billion items were shipped, which is a lot. 40% of those were sold by third-party sellers. So that's kind of some cool info on Amazon, but anyone listening, feel free to kind of find out more about that on your own. I just wanted to acknowledge you and say thank you, Bonnie, again for a wonderful presentation. I actually loved your carrot cake analogy to IMC. I think it's very relatable to understand how to tweak and take away and add IMC tactics without damaging the strategy. So it was great.
Well, you're very welcome. I enjoyed it. And again, on the screen is my contact information. Please don't hesitate to email me or, even text or call me if you want. Again, I'm on Twitter at waxgirl333, and I'm there a lot. So you can contact me there and follow or DM me there if you have other questions that come up.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. This was Lauren from WOMA, and we were delighted to have Bonnie Harris as our co-presenter today. So like she said, follow